The freshly new paint on this car just so happens to win everyone over. But I can't help but see the chassis look a little worn out. And that car being Planet Zoo 2. For the span of 5 months, I have been talking about, if not the biggest flaw of Planet Zoo, which is that the game's overall structure makes you feel like a contractor rather than the zoo director. I hope this video ages like milk because that's the point of this video's creation. I first talked about it on Reddit and then on YouTube, but really you don't need to watch them before watching this because I'll show you the gist of everything. This will be more of a casual video since I'm actually happy about things that are going on right now, allegedly. I'm seldomly going to drive points into the video, so sit back, relax, grab some snacks, man I'm hungry, and enjoy. To put the new and returning viewers up to speed, my problems stemming from the first Planet Zoo game mainly revolved around you, the player, being more of a contractor rather than a bona fide zoo director given its pure focus on building. Planet Zoo also has a fundamental balance problem in terms of gameplay because it rewards the opposite of a real zoo philosophy with mechanics like genetics and albino farming, undermining the entire concept of conservation because the game mechanically incentivizes breeding for color, genetics, and the subsequent inflation of the franchise market. But as of now, thankfully, I have seen less of this, but it doesn't mean it's not there. While all of this ultimately falls into player principles, the game design itself shaped those principles in a way because it encourages these players to do such things. And while I understand that genetics are still viable for the zoo management experience in real life, that's just half the battle for the zoo. Quoting the Reddit post again, it seems like the path of least resistance is farm-like breeding because that's what most players will do because you're allowed to do it anyway, when the end goal is mostly for your own zoo's economy. Creativity is not the root of the problem, but it's just that creativity itself doesn't give you something to care about like a higher calling other than just being the epic zoo builder. So, Planet Zoo 2. My oh my, you got a lot of nerve showing up 2 weeks after the video when I really thought you'd be announced 4 weeks after it. So to keep things well organized, I'm going to cover a few of these things from the good, the somewhat quote-unquote bad, and the potentially ugly, and capping it all off with the things I and other people I've talked to would personally like to see. So with that up to speed, let us start with the good. Planet Zoo 2 solves the first game's issue with its sense of time. As featured in the website, Planet Zoo 2 will have better seasons and longer in-game years, which is a potential win considering that the way the first game paces itself doesn't allow to make room for a more meaningful journey for route management. The concept of time is just as important in any Tycoon game, and how the player is in control of time as well is just as important. From the top of my head, SimCity 4 is another good example of this, mainly as to how your city develops or shrink over time, depending on where you place your zones, transports, parks, and landmarks. I am very glad that they are sparing no expense on the game's lighting, especially when it comes to water and directional lighting, all being carried by ray tracing, and I think it's definitely why the RTX 2060 is part of the minimum requirements, as this game was built with ray tracing in mind. And I think that there is so much potential in-game for something like this, and I will cover that later in the video. I haven't seen people talk about this, but curves. Roofs have curves. They're curvy. I find it quite frankly annoying with Planet Zoo 1 is how limited the roof selection is. I'm not really inclined on anything building related because I love to make use of what's given to me, but I do hope that the East Asian themes wouldn't just stop at Chinese themes because it would be a very nice thing to have a lot more variety instead of a more generalized look. And of course, the elephant in the room, the double A's. Avians and aquatics. My oh my, I genuinely thought they were going to make a Planet Zoo 2 with just avians, and a Planet Zoo 3 with both birds and fish, purely basing it on a track record with Jurassic World Evolution. I mean, they had a toucan and a classic Zoo Tycoon 2 favorite, the secretary bird, and all of these other aquatics look really good, and I am curious to see some iridescent fish species given the Cobra engine's new lighting. Another thing I'd like to go over quick is that the UI itself has a lot of character to it, and I am actually so happy that the website has the same thing going on. It reminds me so much of like Singapore Zoo. I may be biased because olive green is like one of my top 5 colors, but they improved a lot of the iconography on here, and I think it's the best kind of minimalism in a sense on how cohesive it looks whilst retaining a lot of the use of communication through colors. Especially when you're using all of these earthy colors, which is 100% a great fit for what a zoo represents. And I am also very glad that they took a page from Zoo Tycoon 1 here with the side buttons on the left. And lastly, the hub. Now this is the sole reason why I ever bothered to make this video. I remember talking about, or rather suggesting, a sort of world map menu about your zoo funding conservation sites elsewhere, and really I'm just as surprised that the Planet Hub does have something similar to what I've written on Reddit and followed up by a lot of brilliant individuals in its comments. Almost everyone has already talked about this, but I am personally just happy that these new additions point back to my old Reddit post. This quite literally makes this into a Planet Zoo even more. But who's to say that these aren't just marketing terms? That'll also be for later. So, it's all good, man. But despite all this, there are really just a few minuscule things that I would like to call bad. The reason why I would like to highlight it is that I can't run the game. Yep, as do a lot of the people I have talked to, could not even run the game at all, and a lot of users just despise Windows 11. Thankfully or not, this is not Frontier's fault in any way. It's just that this is the tech landscape that we currently live in, and that newer products are required to adapt to current industry norms. There is something that can be potentially ugly. It wouldn't be rather right to be complacent that all of these features shown here that may or may not be executed properly. Even with the Xbox interview with the game's director, some of these things sound vague, even for something that is called a deep dive. The management part is basically just the same thing that has been done before, which leads me to the potential sort of ugly, which is the Planet Hub being a band-aid solution to a problem that has been talked about for quite a long while by a more vocal minority when it comes to management being purely economics rather than just actually wanting the best for your animals. From what I see now, they're doing the same thing Evolution 3 does with Din, but this time Planet Zoo 2 does it with Fen. The biggest problem I have with this is that Fen could possibly just be another Din. I think that the only thing Frontier lacks within its management is synergy. Like, how do these mechanics benefit from each other in such a way that the player feels rewarded and it goes beyond the mundanity of it all? Like, how do you trick the player into making them think that they actually did something worthwhile in everything that they do when they're just actually checking boxes? This is the same way a good zoo would trick the animal into thinking that it's not in captivity, which is a simpler version of asking how do you improve the communication of mechanics to the player to where they are motivated externally, and I think this is the main thing every sandbox game has to tackle every time they literally do something. Like, I don't really care on what they eventually add in a sense that Frontier is the one calling the shots, but what I do care about is how these additions would make the game look and feel richer than it potentially looks, and I trust that Frontier could give the amount of effort that's done for Planet Zoo, and I hope that they won't shy away from such complex topics. It's already pretty complex for me just to simplify everything, so how much more for the people who are actually doing the work? The only things I am getting right now in Planet Zoo 1 is build, adopt, release, earn, and repeat, and my greatest fear for Planet Zoo would be build, adopt, earn, release to Wildlife Zone, and repeat. It's always about making the journey worthwhile, which makes games like Operation Genesis fun to play, even if the endgame is just everything being unlocked and done. Speaking of JPOG, even if everything is done, I think the internal or intrinsic motivation part should be the reward for like completing everything. Like in any other business simulation game, once you're done, you have all the financial freedom to do whatever you desire to do, especially when you're doing it in a non-sandbox mode. To wrap it all up, I just genuinely don't want Planet Zoo 2 to be the new and improved 4K Ultra HD asset placement simulator. It's an issue that has been plaguing the current state of the mainstream zoo game industry, and I hope to see Planet Zoo at least address a couple of these things. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that building is the what, but management is the why. Hence why the lack of synergy is the main problem with how Frontier handles their management. On a playing level, sure, your fantasy is already fulfilled, but philosophically or systematically, the sequel needs to double down on it. I know a lot of people won't agree, but then what's the use of calling it a zoo simulation if we were to remain contented? I don't think I am an old man yelling at a cloud by saying this, not just that I'm probably younger than most Planet Zoo creators out there, but I really just want the people who felt like Planet Zoo 1 was empty actually feel like they're part of the whole conservation mission in the sequel. While it's easier for people to call any modern game soulless these days, I actually disagree with the people saying that Planet Zoo 1 is soulless. It's just that Planet Zoo 1 is just philosophically inconsistent, which can ruin the fun factor and therefore its own soul. From what I have seen, Frontier's track record of good systems, especially between the two types of motivation in terms of management, isn't very consistent in their animal games, and I don't think people who want a challenge should be left out of the conversation because Sandbox will always be there anyway to disable every feature, so why not go ham with it, you know? It's like, why build your own Lego town if you don't make a story behind it? I mean, you can, but how do you make it richer? Like, why write a story about something if you're not influenced by outside factors like movies, music, and personal experiences? I'm sure that everyone has made something out of their toys to make an entire lived-in world by giving a lot of story to your creations. I'm not saying that you need to change the way management is, because that would take a lot of time, and the game's releasing in October, but it's really on how much you would walk the talk when you said meaningful management again. But this time you added like a single chocolate chip into a blank oat cookie and then call it a chocolate chip cookie. It's really just a shame that for something called a gameplay trailer, and most of these are directly related to just the building part of gameplay. Personally, if they are confident enough on the management side of gameplay, they would show more of that side early on. It's just the same patterns I've been seeing for these Frontier games are just showing a new animal, a new building mechanic with little to no improvement on the management at all. But despite that, apart from my concerns, to give credit where it's absolutely due, I am very glad that they listen to the community. From a certain point of view, most if not all of these features are just part of a very vocal majority who especially want birds and aquatics, so it will obviously happen due to high demand. I really just think that for the other side of the fanbase who have always felt like something has been missing since Zoo Tycoon 2, should also have their cake and eat it too. They should also have their voice heard as well. Well, I am really expecting management lovers to take another absolute L for the nth time. I just hope that these new management and gameplay loops wrap themselves together in a nice neat little airtight bow instead of just a snake eating itself. I reckon that the majority of the Planet Zoo 2 poll to see what players needed more for the sequel is mostly people asking for the usual double A's and better building tools. For the people that I am lobbying with, myself included, would still get the game anyway because of the usual improvements done to compare to Planet Zoo 1, whether it's the improved animal models or it's just that it's still the only major zoo game on the market, and we'd get it anyway. When it rains, it pours. But what I am sure though is that you actually stuck around halfway across the video, so thank you so much. Not only for watching but for supporting what I do. I hope these opinions bring forth a lot of value to you, whether you agree or disagree. It's good to have this kind of discourse, although some of you might be curious on what I actually want to see for Planet Zoo 2. Most of the things I want to see mainly go beyond what animals I want in a game, so hear me out for a moment. So without further ado, here are some things that I'd like to see for Planet Zoo 2. And starting with number 1 is Planet Zoo 2 having a sense of character. I'd like to ask you the question, who is the most important person in this video game? Well, the answer is you. My main gripes with Planet Zoo stems so much from the fact that it offloads a lot of its gameplay to your own sense of internal or intrinsic motivation. What I mean by that is that it trusts you a little too much to do something in the game when you're only relying on how you yourself is motivated. I dislike how Planet Zoo treats you like a contractor more than like an actual zoo director, and I don't think just putting a zookeeper mode would fix everything. SimCity 4 is a prime example for this balancing act of being the guy who builds and makes things pretty and being the guy who fixes the cash flow and taxes. SimCity 4 excels at communication of its contract to the player by reinforcing the fantasy that you are the mayor. What I mean by the contract is a transactional relationship between a game's expectations and the player's fulfillment. You buy into the fantasy the game is selling, in which you put in the effort, care about its themes and promises, and you play along with the values the game allows you to follow. In return, the game systems are supposed to reward you by making those specific choices resonate beyond their immediate mechanical rewards. It makes making specific choices feel meaningful within the fantasy the game promised, hence why SimCity 4 made you feel like the bona fide mayor because it borrows certain role-playing elements of immersion to justify your sense of importance. Operation Genesis makes you feel like you're running Jurassic Park because the cast, crises, and progression actively acknowledges your role as the boss. Zoo Tycoon 2 made it more minimal in a sense that you can have a more hands-on approach to your zoo to compensate with the easier style of gameplay compared to Zoo Tycoon 1, while it also takes advantage of a 3D space and it lets you physically step into your own zoo because the game understands that stewardship is the part of the fantasy. This matters because Planet Zoo asks us to care about nurturing, conservation, and ethical zoo management, even with something that is made with the same engine as Zoo Tycoon 2 like Fallout New Vegas. It excels at this through delivering and selling a sense of weight to your own choices, even if it's non-existent at times, and most of the things that give you that said weight is mostly found in dialogue. Planet Zoo's career mode passively gives you something like this, but it follows more of a 3-tier checklist akin to Roller Coaster Tycoon 3, in which is fitting due to its focus on building being a part of a connected system due to its main premise of creating a well-designed theme park, in contrast to the more personal and collaborative nature of running a zoo. The mechanics, in my opinion, just need a little more push to a better connection with the game's themes. To set the gold standard for such design, developers in Valve established a golden rule for their level designers, being that they should never ignore a player's intent.
Where you'd be sitting in a design review and somebody say that's not realistic, and you're like, okay, what does that have to, like, explain to me why that's interesting, because in the real world I have to write up lists of stuff I have to go to the grocery store to buy, and I've never thought to myself that realism is fun. I go play games to have fun, and so we had to come up with some notion of what fun was. We knew it was an ad hoc definition, and it was the degrees to which the game recognizes and responded to the player's choices and actions, right? You know, in behavioral science, you would say we're explicitly talking about what were reinforcers and what the reinforcement schedules were, right? At that point in time, that was a useful way of making design decisions. The point I would make is, if I go up to a wall and shoot it, to me, it feels like the wall is ignoring me. I'm getting a narcissistic injury when the world is ignoring me. So does this, like, to me, I was trying to convey to the user a sense of, yes, you were making choices, yes, you were progressing, which meant the game had to acknowledge that back to you. If you shoot at a wall, there have to be decals. If you kill a bunch of Marines, the Marines have to run away from you, right? You have to have this sense of the game acknowledging and responding to the choices and actions and progressions that you've made. Otherwise, it loses any sort of impact.
It may sound that this is too much design theory for a simple zoo game, and because of this, please allow me to make a more direct correlation to put it into practice. The longest gripe that I've had is that they're underutilizing a lot of these characters for Planet Zoo. In SimCity 4, you have these advisors that consist of city planning, finance, utilities, public safety, health and education, transport, and the environment, who allow the player to have clean yet personal type of feel when you're dealing with a whole city you have built in a video game. Which is funny because it's more complex than any zoo game on the market, but it still manages to communicate this in a more simple manner. What I'm trying to convey here is that SimCity 4 is a prime example of management synergy because of gamifying a complex topic such as city building. You might say that zoo building in a game isn't just as inherently complex as city building, but I beg to differ when Frontier bothers to add gender ratios, space calculations, and overcrowding issues to your animals. Everything's already there, but what makes or breaks a game's sense of character is the personality the developers use to convey a game's mechanics, whether you do it just once or make it an integral part of the minute-to-minute gameplay. Which leads to FEN, the conservation organization of Planet Zoo 2. I think there is so much potential for that. I really just want it to have real effects on actual gameplay itself instead of being just there. Evolutions 3 had that problem with Din, being that the concept is already there, but it's unfortunately just there. Now, I don't want people to miss the point on this one, but I am comparing this to SimCity 4 because it's about making everything cleaner and comprehensive, but also make things personal to players who actually want more than just building without things getting out of control. By making management look in a way cleaner, it actually gives the builders more room to breathe while still getting challenged. On a design level, it could also add a lot more room for introducing new, deeper, and stronger management mechanics without sacrificing the risk of alienating players. With that, Planet Zoo should not pretend that it's not a video game. I find a lot of games that try so hard to be ultra realistic when the actual goal should be more focused on being ultra authentic. Builders gonna build, but the most diehard of Tycoon fans want rewarding friction. This goes beyond Tycoon games with games like Kingdom Come Deliverance. The core of the game is its immersive combat in 1403 Bohemia. Even in KCD's hardcore mode, in which the compass and fast travel are disabled, where you actually have to walk or ride your horse to your destinations, merchants pay less for what you sell, but they sell more for what you buy. And you have to take at least 2 mandatory negative perks, but it won't bother you with stitching all of your wounds together or manually repairing your armor, and instead you can just drink the Lazarus potion and use an armor kit on that. A lot of people won't agree with this, mainly because Planet Zoo's identity is generally called more of a building game, but since they want it to be like that, it will always be a non-issue because you can always turn everything off in Sandbox. I really don't want this to be in a Planet Zoo 3, and I do not think a Planet Zoo 3 should exist at all. Same thing with a Jurassic World Evolution 4. We should not normalize constant sequels at all. And if it does, I think it would be a huge failure on Frontier's end that would forever affirm that their sequels are being carried by only a few marketing crutches, like with new features like modular building and animal breeding in Evolution 3. Because I genuinely think, given how Planet Zoo 2 sets itself up, it has so much potential to have long-term support, much like to a game such as Hearts of Iron 4. I could see a lot of this, like Planet Zoo could have an actual full expansion instead of like extra maps and whatnot, but a full-fledged integration of much larger and stronger mechanics that improves the overall system. And yeah, a lot of big words for wanting Frontier to be open to the idea of a full-on expansion like Zoo Tycoon 2. But to clarify, this is not about just making a big DLC and calling it a day. As customers, we should at least try to let Frontier know that we are open to such ideas. But we should also be responsible enough to look for a realistic middle ground on a topic like this. I try to not use Zoo Tycoon 2 as a benchmark, given how I don't want people to just simplify that Frontier should make Planet Zoo 2 like Zoo Tycoon 2 and call it a day. But there are a few set of examples that would pretty much warrant this. I know that a majority would be contented with the new things that are coming out, but there's really nothing wrong with being okay with everything, but there's also nothing wrong with wanting a little more. And I said wanting, by the way. And on the side note, I don't want Frontier to jingle keys in front of players like what they did to Evolution 3. I think it's very diabolical to do that to your paying customers. Then again, they have a lot of amazing attempts to blueball their players for the years, either through a new game or new updates, but that's just the reality of game marketing. If you can't have the golden goose, you might as well grab different eggs. So I really just need them to focus on the literal product itself. And the product itself, in theory, can carry the entire marketing. That being the product becoming something as timeless as the old-time greats. Thinking upon what I just said, I think that there is so much potential for Planet Zoo to be more than just a product by being a platform itself. With a lot of these zoo games, a lot of them should carry the weight of deconstructing the real-world idea of a zoo being an animal's prison. For zoo fans, of course, we know that's not true. But since zoos are heavy on advocacy and education, these games should carry a sense of responsibility for such things. It's arguable that Planet Zoo doesn't need to be this, but really, why build a church without a deity for it? Why go to a TED Talk without a speaker? A lot of things are done with a purpose, and I think that Planet Zoo 2 has a lot of potential for that. I'm not saying that zoo games that don't do this are essentially bad, but since Planet Zoo 2 is so committed to these types of things, it would make no sense not to require them of this. All of these animals you see in zoos are ambassadors to their kind in the wild. Not that bad zoos don't exist, but who's to say you can have that in Planet Zoo? But for that, I'll leave it up to you. Speaking of wanting things, this leads to a topic that relates to a lot of people wanting something, which is number 2, the execution of DLC. A pet peeve I've had with the Planet Zoo 1 DLCs is that you are essentially paying for most of the animals that, in my opinion, should have been in the base game. The polar bear, the dromedary camel, etc, etc. In my opinion, the animals you usually see in a zoo should be in the base game. For animals that you normally see in zoos that aren't in the game, I think it could benefit from a free update from Frontier, while rarer animals are for DLC. It communicates a meta sense of immersion, like the DLC structure itself feels like the part of the game's world rather than just another thing to add on the store shelf. It can actually help with relatively rare animals and even put some wiggle room for animals that exist in sort of a gray area. Like, imagine a full-on Japanese animal pack, and that includes the Japanese wolf, an animal somewhere between extinction and being sort of not, but it's kind of extinct. I think what I'm trying to say here is that the game has potential because you are already fulfilling a fantasy of building your own zoo, so Planet Zoo should be more of an extension of reality rather than just an imitation of it. Now, I've heard people say that they want Cenozoics and any other actually extinct animals, but I think there could be a little more leeway in the extinct category in a sense that animals are in between actually existing or definitely dead. I understand that Planet Zoo is banking very hard on the simulation aspect, but who's to say that this can't work in its favor? But at the end of the day, the DLCs are and always will be a polarizing thing in the community. But really, the potential is already there, and I think it could add a lot more character to what they are doing right now. But on the topic of immersion, this would lead me to number 3, and that is stakes. For example, I hope people would have elite ball knowledge on this one, but in a zoo game like Mondo Zoo, you buy animals legitimately or through the black market, and I think that Planet Zoo 2 could have that sort of choice-based progression in which, for example, you buy an animal from the black market, which is good for your pocket, but it runs the risk of diseases, outbreaks, bad genetics, inbred animals, and reputation loss. What I would personally like to see and have for Planet Zoo 2 is to have management be more focused on the weight of the player's choice. The Jurassic World Evolution games did that with their choice events, for example, choose option A or option B and get that outcome and that reward, and it's also similar to Zoo Tycoon 2's challenge mode. And I think that Planet Zoo 2 has the potential to expand upon this in a much more meaningful way if they really want to walk the talk on meaningful management and being the ultimate zoo simulator. Evolution 3 did that whole thing with their dino market, but it's more of a Facebook marketplace. It's really funny though that buying a cheap herbivore with shady details turns out to be a T-Rex. I like that it's a feature, but really the wins outweigh the actual losses, so the stakes never feel real because you get a better dinosaur for dirt cheap and terrain tools are free anyway, unlike in Zoo Tycoon 1, in which you have to pay for them, so you can use the terrain tools just to keep dinosaur in, so there isn't really much to worry about. In shortest of shorts, choices should actually matter, whether it's smooth sailing or punishing the wrong choices severely, and yes, my time with Kingdom Come Deliverance has been highly influencing this point of view, as it's a good example of using its systems for player affirmation and punishment, and I think Frontier can learn a thing or two on its execution. On that note, I do think zoo reputation should matter in a sense, like something like an accredited or non-accredited zoo status affecting how you trade and adopt animals in franchise mode or even in career. Kind of like the zoo fame mechanic in Zoo Tycoon 2, but on a more realistic and grounded sense. From what I've read, real zoos operate under systems like this already, and its inspiration is sitting right there for Frontier to fully embrace. I'm not going to be prescribing exactly how they would do this. I'm just curious on how Frontier would approach it, in which I hope they ever end up doing it. But if you really want to do the bare minimum on the execution, you could literally just go make something in the zoo tank very hard to make the player feel the weight of their actions. Imagine like sending an animal to the correct biome but in the wrong continent and it becomes an invasive species. The bare minimum of this would be a huge effect on the population while significantly lowering your reputation for your misdeeds. And again, everything management related I talk about is not an issue to builder lovers because sandbox mode exists. But I am rather fearful that the management part would still take the L again. As for loving building, Evolution 3 and Planet Coaster 2 pretty much fixed that for me, mainly because of the dirt decals and the scale tools and the foliage brush. But my biggest gripe in both of these games is number 4, text. Now I have a bone to pick with how Planet Zoo handles text. You see this entrance right here? They're made of gutters. And every time I want to write non-English text in science, it just gives me all the funny rectangles. Like, since Planet Zoo 2 makes you go around the world with different languages in each region or continent, maybe a procedural 3D text generator that supports different non-English languages could help. I mean, you're already doubling down on the immersion factor, so if people already criticize Planet Zoo as a 3D software more than a game, you might as well double down, right? just kidding. No, really, just don't forget on doubling down on the management. But to put light on the act of doubling down, number 5 is light. If you'd name one thing that every living thing is entirely dependent on, it's light. And I don't want to make light of something that can give a lot of potential, given how there are birds and aquatics now who are known to be very reactive to light. Birds and aquatics are entirely governed by what it's called photoperiodism, which is the psychological reaction of organisms to the length of a day or night, which is a fancy way of saying that I have birds and fish as pets, so I got an idea for that. Since ray tracing may be a mandatory thing for Planet Zoo in terms of lighting, I think the game itself could take advantage of it through barrierless enclosures for aviaries similar to the Bronx Zoo's World of Birds exhibits, as well as even better interior lighting, which can make players make something akin to the lobby of the Moat Science Education Aquarium. I mean, if the system requirements is at minimum, again a 2060, you might as well get more than what's worth for it than just upgrading your computer on this. But on the conservation side, there's nothing more rewarding in a zoo game than seeing the animals behave realistically and authentically, and I think their reactions toward light should definitely be a part of it. Is this a challenge I'd like to see Frontier take on? Well, yeah, I think Frontier should think harder on what can make a game be more unified. With all this, I really don't want to list down features that's just added for the novelty, but rather, it's a demand for a game that respects the player's intelligence. While a lot of these don't go way into detail, I hope that my trust in Frontier won't be displaced when it comes to the sequel of their favorite child. And now, it's closing time. I may go off on a bit that Frontier is actually listening to what I have been saying for months, but really, none of that conversation would have happened without the community keeping those thoughts alive even for a short period of time, and I am eternally grateful for a lot of you who have come here specifically for what I think about these zoo games. But unfortunately, this will be my last video on Planet Zoo or Zoo Tycoon, except for the Zoo Tycoon 2 video, as that would be a special episode for this channel. But really, I don't want to be the zoo game guy because there are a lot of creators who fit in the mold so well with that niche, mainly because that the things I said here can mostly be applied to other games, so it would be nice for me to play and experience other games beyond these zoo games. So expect another Planet Zoo video in 2 years if this video ages poorly, in which I genuinely hope it does, because I would definitely need to have a fully immersed experience on it while also having formed a better opinion over time. But honestly, I probably can't run away from things like these, as the Tycoon games are the best performing videos of this channel, so we'll see. If you want to support on what I do here, please do subscribe, or if you still want to know or support what I want to see in Zoo Tycoon or in Planet or in Planet Zoo 2, I would definitely drop a suggestion on the Frontier Discord if it holds a lot of weight. So, I hope you enjoyed this video, I hope you like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.